Florida real estate mogul vanished from his yacht. Later, the anchor was found buried miles inland. In the sun-drenched sprawl of South Florida, where palm trees swayed against the endless blue of the Atlantic and the air hummed with the promise of quick fortunes, Victor Langford had built an empire from nothing. At 52, he was the kind of man who turned swamps into subdivisions and empty lots into luxury condos that dotted the skyline like jewels. His company, Langford Developments, had reshaped Miami's waterfront, erecting gleaming high-rises that housed celebrities and tech moguls fleeing the mainland's chill. Victor's office overlooked Biscayne Bay from the top floor of a glass tower he'd designed himself, where the salty breeze mixed with the scent of fresh coffee and the low murmur of deal-making phone calls. Victor wasn't born to this life. He'd grown up in a modest bungalow in West Palm Beach, the son of a fisherman who spent his days hauling grouper from the Gulf Stream and his nights nursing beers at a dimly lit bar. "You gotta grab what's yours, kid," his father would say, slapping a calloused hand on the scarred wooden table, the radio crackling with baseball scores in the background. Young Victor listened, scraping through community college on scholarships and odd jobs, then diving headfirst into real estate during the 90s boom. By his 30s, he'd flipped his first beachfront property, a rundown motel turned boutique hotel, and the rest snowballed. Now, his net worth hovered in the 9 figures, splashed across Forbes lists and local society pages. But success came with strings, endless board meetings, lawsuits from environmental groups claiming he paved over wetlands, and a gnawing sense that the high life was as fragile as the sand castles his grandkids built on the shore. His family was the anchor in that stormy sea. Victor had been married to Elena for 28 years, a sharp-eyed Cuban-American woman who'd started as his real estate paralegal and become his fiercest advisor. They met during a closing on a Coconut Grove estate, her no-nonsense questions cutting through the lawyerly fog like a knife. "If you're buying this, you better know the zoning laws inside out," she'd said, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes flashing with that mix of fire and calculation that hooked him instantly. Now, Elena managed the home front from their sprawling estate in Coral Gables, a Mediterranean-style villa with terracotta roofs and a pool that shimmered like liquid sapphire under the Florida sun. Their 2 kids, Sophia and Marco, had grown into adults who orbited the family business. Sophia handling marketing with her Ivy League polish, Marco learning the ropes in construction oversight. Life moved at a relentless clip those days. Mornings started with Victor jogging the beach at dawn, the waves crashing rhythmically as joggers and dog walkers nodded hello, the horizon painted in soft pinks and oranges. He'd return home to Elena's cafecito, strong and sweet, brewed in the copper pot her abuela had passed down. "Another big day?" she'd ask, stirring honey into her cup, the kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh mangoes from their backyard tree. Victor would nod, kissing her forehead, already mentally mapping out the day's agenda, a site visit to a new development in Fort Lauderdale, lunch with investors at a waterfront steakhouse where the clink of silverware mingled with yacht horns, and evenings poring over blueprints in his study, the glow of his desk lamp cutting through the humid night air. But beneath the polished surface, cracks were forming. The real estate market was heating up again after a post-pandemic slump. But whispers of a slowdown rippled through industry chats. Rising interest rates, insurance hikes from hurricane threats. Victor felt the pressure like a weight on his chest during late-night drives along A1A, the ocean on one side and neon-lit strip malls on the other, headlights sweeping over billboards advertising his own projects. He'd confided in Elena one rainy afternoon, thunder rumbling over the Everglades as they sat on the lanai, rain pattering on the tin roof. "What if this bubble bursts? We've poured everything into these builds." Elena squeezed his hand, her voice steady. "We've weathered worse, Vic. Remember the crash in '08? We came out stronger." Her words were a balm, but doubt lingered, fueling his restlessness. That restlessness led him to the water more often. Victor had always loved the sea, childhood memories of fishing with his dad, the boat rocking gently as lines bobbed in the current. In his 40s, he'd splurged on the yacht, a 60-foot beauty named Horizon's Edge, sleek white fiberglass gleaming under the dock lights at Miami's Dinner Key Marina. It wasn't just a toy, It was his escape, a place to entertain clients with sunset cruises, the deck alive with laughter, chilled Chardonnay, and the sizzle of grilled mahi-mahi. Weekends, he'd take the family out, anchoring off Key Biscayne where the water turned turquoise and clear, snorkel gear splashing as Sophia and Marco dove for conch shells. "This is living," Victor would say, leaning back in a deck chair, the sun warming his face, the only sound the lap of waves against the hull. Lately, though, the outings were solo. Business stress had frayed his nerves, and Elena noticed the late nights he spent tinkering on the yacht, polishing brass fittings or checking the engines in the dim glow of the bilge lights. "You're out there too much alone," she said one evening over dinner. The kids visiting from their apartments in Brickell, plates of arroz con pollo steaming on the table. Marco chimed in, fork paused mid-air. "Dad, come on, let's plan a family trip. Get away from the spreadsheets." Victor smiled, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the garden lights flickering through the window. "Soon," he promised, though they all sensed the undercurrent of something unspoken, a weariness, perhaps, or the quiet fear of a man who'd chased the American dream only to wonder if it might slip away like sand through his fingers. As summer deepened, the heat wave blanketing Florida like a heavy blanket, Victor's routine solidified around the yacht. He'd motor out early, the engine's hum drowning out the marina's morning bustle, seagulls squawking, ropes creaking against cleats. Out on the open water, with the mainland shrinking to a hazy line, he found a fragile peace, the salt spray cooling his skin, the vastness reminding him of possibilities beyond balance sheets. Little did anyone know that peace would soon shatter in ways no one could have imagined. If you're finding this story pulling at your heartstrings already, thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the twists ahead. Your support means the world to stories like these. Victor's last full day ashore was unremarkable, the kind of humid Thursday that blurred into the next. He kissed Elena goodbye in the driveway, her hand lingering on his arm as she watched him load a cooler into his SUV. "Call when you anchor," she said, the concern in her voice masked by a smile. He nodded, promising to check in, then drove to the marina, the radio tuned to a local station playing classic rock, windows down to catch the breeze off the bay. By noon, Horizon's Edge was cutting through the choppy waters, headed for a quiet spot off Elliott Key in Biscayne National Park. Victor settled into the captain's chair, the sun high and unrelenting, unaware that this voyage would mark the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Florida's coast for years. The waters off Elliott Key were a deceptive calm that afternoon, the kind that lulled even seasoned boaters into a false sense of security. Victor Langford guided Horizon's Edge through the gentle swells, the yacht's twin diesel engines purring steadily as it sliced toward the national park's protected coves. Biscayne Bay stretched out behind him, a mosaic of turquoise and deeper blues, dotted with the white specks of other vessels, sailboats tacking lazily, fishing charters trailing lines for snapper. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the deck into a hot plate, but Victor welcomed the burn. It sharpened his focus, pushing away the fog of boardroom battles and market jitters. He adjusted his sunglasses, the polarized lenses cutting the glare off the water, and reached for the VHF radio to check in with the marina office, a habit Elena insisted on. "Everything's set here," he said into the mic, his voice carrying that easy South Florida drawl, roughened by years of shouting over construction sites. The response crackled back from the dispatcher, a young guy named Raoul who'd worked the docks since Victor bought the slip. "Copy that, Mr. Langford. Winds are light out of the southeast. Should be smooth sailing. You need anything?" Victor chuckled, the sound lost in the engine's hum. "Nah, just some peace and quiet. I'll be anchored till sunset." He signed off, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease as the mainland faded to a distant smudge on the horizon. Elliott Key loomed ahead, its mangrove fringes thick and tangled, a wild barrier where the park's rules kept development at bay. No condos here, just the raw edge of the Everglades meeting the sea. Victor had scouted spots like this for potential ecotourism ventures. But today, it was purely personal, a reset button on a life spinning too fast. He dropped anchor in a sheltered inlet around 2 p.m., the chain rattling over the bow as it plunged into the sandy bottom some 20 feet down. The water was gin clear, schools of sergeant majors darting like silver confetti below the surface. Victor killed the engines, the sudden silence amplifying the slosh of waves against the hull and the distant cry of an osprey wheeling overhead. He stepped onto the aft deck, barefoot on the warm teak, and cracked open a cold beer from the cooler, the condensation dripping onto his faded polo shirt. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed seaweed, with a faint undercurrent of diesel from the bilge. Leaning against the railing, he scanned the empty bay. No other boats in sight. Just the quay's shoreline curving away, fringed by buttonwood trees and the occasional flash of an ibis foraging in the shallows. For the first time in weeks, his mind quieted. The only agenda, the rhythm of the tide. As the afternoon wore on, Victor busied himself with small tasks, the kind that grounded him. He swabbed the deck, the soapy water foaming white before sluicing into the sea, then tinkered with the GPS unit in the salon, its screen glowing with charts of the bay's contours. Around 4 o'clock he fired up the grill on the flybridge, the sizzle of marinated shrimp filling the air as he flipped them with tongs, flames licking up from the coals. He ate standing up, plate in hand, savoring the smoky char and the view of the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose. Elena's text buzzed on his phone. "Home safe? Kids say hi." He smiled, thumbs tapping a quick reply. "All good, anchoring off Elliot. Love you," before pocketing it. The signal was spotty out here, bars flickering like a weak pulse, but it held just enough for the message to send. Dusk crept in slowly, the light softening the edges of everything. Victor finished his meal and descended to the cabin, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the faint mustiness of stored life jackets and charts. He poured a scotch over ice, the clink of cubes echoing in the compact galley, and settled into the leather bench by the nav station, flipping through a dog-eared copy of a Hemingway novel, Old Man and the Sea, fitting for a day like this. The words blurred a bit after the second drink, but the story pulled him in, mirroring his own lifelong tussle with the unpredictable currents of fortune. Outside, the anchor chain groaned faintly as the tide shifted, the yacht swinging gently on its mooring. He glanced at his watch. 7:15 p.m. Time to head back soon. Elena would worry if he pushed it too late, with nightfall bringing choppier seas and the risk of unlit crab pots. But something held him there, a reluctance to shatter the solitude. Victor stepped out to the bow, the deck lights casting long shadows across the water, now darkening to indigo. The stars were emerging, pinpricks against the velvet sky, and a light breeze rustled the mangroves on shore, carrying the chirp of crickets from the quay. He lit a cigar, the match flaring briefly, and inhaled deeply, watching the ember glow. His phone buzzed again. Marco this time. "Dad, you catch anything? Mom's making paella tomorrow." Victor typed back, "Just some R&R, see you soon." But as he hit send, the screen glitched, signal dropping to 0. No big deal, he'd call from the marina. He finished the cigar, grinding it out in a deck ashtray, and turned toward the salon to prep for departure. That's when the unease started, subtle at first, like a shadow crossing the moon. The anchor chain, usually taut, seemed slack, the bow drifting a hair too far from its set point. Victor frowned, moving to the windlass to check it. The chain paid out smoothly as he hauled it up, but the anchor itself felt off, lighter than expected, as if it hadn't dug in properly. He winched it aboard, the metal clanging against the roller, and examined it under the deck light. Flukes caked in sand and shell fragments, nothing amiss. Shaking his head, he chalked it up to the soft bottom, common in these shallow bays. He stowed it in the locker, the lid slamming shut with a finality that echoed over the water. By 8:30, with the last light bleeding from the sky, Victor fired up the engines again, the rumble vibrating through the hull. He eased the throttles forward, the yacht responding with a surge, cutting away from the inlet toward the open bay. The running lights pierced the gathering dark, red and green beacons against the black. Navigation was straightforward, follow the GPS track back to the channel markers. But Victor kept a sharp eye on the depth finder. Its beeps warning of shallows. The sea had picked up, a steady chop from the incoming tide slapping the hull, spraying mist across the windshield. He wiped it away with a rag, humming an old Jimmy Buffett tune to himself, the lyrics about margaritas and lost salt life fitting the moment. Then, without warning, the yacht lurched. Not a wave, but something sharper, a jolt that sent Victor grabbing the console, coffee mug from earlier tumbling to the deck in a shatter of porcelain. The engines revved high, props churning air for a split second before biting water again. "What the hell?" he muttered, throttling back, heart pounding. He scanned the sonar, clear, but the hull groaned, as if scraping bottom despite the 30-foot depths. Alarms blared from the panel, depth finder screaming shallow. Victor killed the engines, the silence deafening, broken only by the slap of waves and his own ragged breathing. He rushed to the bow, flashlight beam cutting the night, searching for debris or a rogue buoy. Nothing, just the endless dark water mocking him. Panic flickered, but he pushed it down. Years of dealing with busted deals had taught him to stay cool. He restarted the engines, this time idling forward slowly, tracing his outbound path on the chart plotter. The GPS held steady, coordinates matching the marina's approach, but as minutes ticked by, the mainland lights stayed stubbornly distant, the yacht seeming to circle in place despite the throttle. Victor grabbed the VHF, twisting the dial. "Mayday, mayday, this is Horizon's Edge. Position off Elliott Key. Experiencing navigation issue? Request assistance." Static hissed back, no response. The antenna must have snagged during that lurch. He tried his cell, still no bars. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mixing with salt spray as he wrestled with the wheel, the night closing in like a vice. Hours blurred in the struggle. Victor tinkered frantically, resetting breakers, checking fuel lines, even dropping a makeshift anchor from spare chain to hold position. But each attempt only deepened the disorientation. The stars wheeled wrong. The compass spun lazily. Exhaustion clawed at him, the scotch turning sour in his gut. By midnight, with the bay a void around him, he slumped in the captain's chair, radio mic clutched in white-knuckled hand, whispering into the static, "Elena. Somebody." The last transmission anyone would hear from him was a garbled plea, picked up faintly by a passing freighter. "Stuck. Anchor. Help." Then silence. Horizon's Edge drifted through the night, lights winking like a ghost ship. Victor Langford vanished into the vast, indifferent sea. Dawn broke gray and overcast, the kind of Florida morning where humidity clung like regret. The yacht was found adrift near the park's edge by a park ranger on patrol, engines cold, deck empty, no sign of struggle or departure. The anchor locker gaped open, chain neatly coiled inside. But the 100-pound anchor itself? Gone, as if it had never been. Elena's call to the Coast Guard came at 7 a.m., her voice breaking over the line. "He was supposed to be home last night. Something's wrong. I know it." Search boats fanned out from the marina, choppers thumping overhead, but the waters off Elliott Key yielded nothing. No life jacket, no debris, no trace of the man who'd conquered Florida's shores. Victor Langford had simply disappeared. The news hit like a rogue wave, crashing through the Langford home in Coral Gables, just as the morning sun filtered through the bougainvillea vines draping the stucco walls. Elena stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. The cafecito she'd brewed earlier now cold and forgotten on the granite counter. Her hands trembled as she ended the call with the marina manager, who confirmed the yacht's discovery, adrift, unmanned, Victor's keys and wallet still tucked in the console drawer. "He's gone," she whispered to herself, the words tasting like ash, before dialing the kids. Sophia arrived first, speeding over from her Brickell condo in a blur of tears and half-formed questions, her designer blouse rumpled from a sleepless night. Marco pulled up minutes later, his truck screeching into the driveway, face pale under the stubble he'd forgotten to shave. By 8 a.m., the Coast Guard station in Miami buzzed with activity, the air thick with the tang of salt and machine oil from the docked cutters. Search and rescue teams mobilized swiftly. their orange life vests stark against the gray dawn as they loaded gear into Boston whalers. Life rings, thermal imaging scopes, and underwater drones humming to life. Commander Lisa Torres, a no-nonsense veteran with 20 years scanning these treacherous waters, took charge from the ops center, her voice steady over the radio. All units, this is Tango 1. Victor Langford, male, 52, last seen on Horizon's Edge off Elliott Key. Possible man overboard or mechanical failure. Grid search pattern Delta, starting at coordinates 25, 47 north, 80, 22 west. Eyes sharp for debris or personal effects. The choppers lifted off from the helipad, rotors whipping up spray from the bay, their spotlights soon sweeping the surface like accusatory fingers. Elena arrived at the station with the family in tow, her eyes red-rimmed but posture rigid, the same steel that had navigated Victor through bankruptcies and booms. She clutched a photo of him, smiling on the yacht deck, wind touseling his silver-streaked hair, as if it could summon him back. He wouldn't just leave, she told Torres in the briefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Maps of Biscayne Bay pinned to the walls showing depth contours and shipping lanes. Vic's a survivor. He checks in, always. Something happened out there. Torres nodded sympathetically, her pen scratching notes on a clipboard. We're treating this as urgent, ma'am. Weather's cooperating, no storms brewing, but these waters can swallow a man whole. We'll drag the inlet, interview any witnesses. Sophia paced nearby, phone in hand, already fielding calls from Victor's office. Marco slumped in a plastic chair, fists clenched, staring at the floor where coffee stains dotted the linoleum like forgotten clues. The search unfolded in relentless waves, mirroring the bay's own restless tide. Ground teams combed the mangroves along Elliott Key, wading through knee-deep muck that sucked at their boots, the air heavy with the buzz of mosquitoes and the rot of tidal pools. Rangers from Biscayne National Park joined in, their kayaks slicing through the shallows, eyes scanning for anything out of place, a shoe snagged on a root, a cap bobbing in the current. Overhead, the MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter thumped across the grid, its FLIR camera detecting heat signatures that turned out to be sun-warmed rocks or startled manatees. On the water, divers plunged into the turquoise depths, bubbles rising like silver chains, probing the sandy bottom for the missing anchor or any sign of the yacht's path. Negative on visual, came the reports over the comms, voices crackling with static. Repeating Sector Bravo. Media vans clogged the marina by midday, their satellite dishes unfolding like mechanical flowers under the relentless sun. Reporters from Channel 7 and the Miami Herald swarmed the docks, microphones thrust toward Elena as she waited for updates, the family's grief now public spectacle. Mr. Langford's a pillar of our community, one anchor intoned on the noon broadcast, footage rolling of his high-rises gleaming against the skyline. Real estate titan vanishes at sea, foul play or accident. Sophia shielded her mother from the cameras, her voice sharp. Please give us space. He's out there somewhere. But the questions piled on. Had Victor been stressed? Enemies from a recent land deal dispute. Whispers circulated about a bitter lawsuit over a polluted development site. Environmentalists claiming he'd buried toxins under concrete. Elena waved them off, retreating to the SUV where Marco muttered, Dad wouldn't run, not from this. As hours stretched into the afternoon, the search intensified, but cracks began to show. A false lead came first. A fishing charter reported spotting a lone figure in a dinghy near Black Point Marina, heart rates spiking until it proved to be a local retiree hauling crab traps. Then, the underwater drone captured an anomaly, a dark shape on the sonar, sending divers down in a frenzy. It was just a sunken log, encrusted with barnacles, mocking their hopes. The tide turned against them too, ebbing strong and pulling debris seaward, scattering any potential evidence into the Gulf Stream. By evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the bay in bloody oranges, fatigue set in. Crews rotated shifts, but the grid yielded zilch. No oil slicks, no personal items, not even a scrap of clothing tangled in the props of a passing boat. Elena's resolve frayed in the ops center that night. The room dimmed under humming fluorescence, coffee pots gurgling empty. Torres pulled her aside, voice low and measured. We've covered 50 square miles, ma'am. No distress signals beyond that garbled VHF hit. The yacht's GPS logs show it drifting erratically after 10 p.m. Could be a storm surge or engine snag threw him off course. Elena's eyes welled, but she straightened. Keep looking. He's not the type to vanish without a fight. Marco, overhearing, slammed a fist on the table. What about the anchor? It's missing. Doesn't that mean something? Like sabotage? Torres exchanged glances with her team. The open locker was noted, but without the hardware. It was just another puzzle piece. We're expanding to shorelines tomorrow. Feds are looping in now. FBI for the mogul angle. The initial push faltered by dawn of the second day, the search radius ballooning to 100 miles as leads dried up. Volunteers from Victor's company joined, their boats motoring out from Dinner Key, horns blaring in solidarity. But the bay's vastness mocked their efforts. Elena returned home under a sky-threatening rain, the villa's pool lights flickering like lost signals. She sat on the lanai, rain pattering on the palms, replaying Victor's last text. All good. Grief twisted with doubt. Had he confided something she missed? The kids hovered, Sophia brewing tea in the galley, Marco scanning news feeds on his laptop. They'll find him, he said, more plea than promise, but the silence from the sea spoke louder. Public interest surged. Tip lines lighting up with sightings. A man matching Victor's description at a Key Largo dive bar, another fueling a rental car in Homestead. But each fizzled under scrutiny. The Coast Guard scaled back to routine patrols by day 3, resources stretched thin by a brewing tropical depression off the Bahamas. We're not giving up, Torres assured Elena over the phone, the static underscoring the distance. But the failure hung heavy, a fog over the family, turning every wave crash into a taunt. Victor Langford, the man who'd reshaped Florida's coast, had slipped through its fingers, leaving only questions and an empty yacht bobbing like a hollow promise. The search pressed on, but hope ebbed with the tide, the mystery deepening in the shadows of the mangroves. Weeks turned into months under Florida's unyielding sun, the kind that baked the earth into cracked clay and turned the air into a thick, soupy haze. The Langford Villa in Coral Gables, once alive with Victor's booming laughter and the clatter of family dinners, now echoed with a hollow quiet. Elena moved through the days like a ghost in her own home, the terracotta tiles cool under her bare feet as she wandered from room to room. The pool, that shimmering sapphire Victor had loved to dive into after long days, sat still and unused, its surface rippling only when a stray breeze stirred the palm fronds overhead. She'd sit on the lanai most evenings, a glass of white wine sweating in her hand, watching the sunset bleed orange across the skyline he'd helped build. The distant hum of traffic on US 1 blended with the cicadas' chorus, a relentless soundtrack to her grief. Sophia threw herself into work, her Brickell office becoming a second skin. The marketing suite at Langford Developments buzzed with the click of keyboards and the murmur of conference calls, but her focus sharpened into something fierce, almost vengeful. "We can't let this derail everything Dad built," she'd say to her team during morning huddles, her voice steady despite the dark circles under her eyes. Posters of Victor's projects, gleaming condos rising from the marshy edges of the Everglades, lined the walls, a constant reminder. Yet, in quieter moments, she'd stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Biscayne Bay, where cargo ships lumbered like distant memories, and wonder if he was out there somewhere, adrift in a way no search could touch. The company teetered. Investors pulled back, whispering about instability, and a rival developer snapped up a prime lot in Hollywood Beach that Victor had eyed. Sophia fought it all, her emails laced with Elena's old fire. "Langford stands strong. We're not folding." Marco, ever the hands-on one, retreated to the construction sites, the dust and diesel fumes a balm against the ache. He'd rise before dawn, the sky still bruised purple, and drive his pickup to the Fort Lauderdale build, a cluster of townhomes overlooking the intracoastal, hammers echoing like heartbeats against the concrete forms. "Keep it moving," he'd bark at the crew, his hard hat low over furrowed brows, sweat soaking his shirt in the midday scorch. The men respected him, calling him Junior, with a nod to Victor's legacy, but they saw the strain. The way he'd pause mid-instruction, gaze fixed on the water lapping the pilings, as if expecting the yacht to round the bend. Nights, he'd crash at the family home, nursing a beer on the back patio where the grill still bore the char marks from Victor's last cookout. "You think he knew something was coming?" he'd ask Elena one humid evening, the air heavy with jasmine from the garden. She shook her head, her silver-streaked hair catching the porch light. "Your father was a fighter, mijo. Whatever happened, he didn't go quiet." The media frenzy ebbed like the tide, replaced by the steady drip of speculation. Front-page stories in the Miami Herald gave way to brief updates buried in the real estate section, alongside ads for hurricane shutters and beachfront flips. A true crime podcast out of Tampa devoted an episode to the case, the host's voice gravelly over sound bites of Elena's press conference. "Victor Langford, accident, foul play, or something more sinister?" The missing anchor raises eyebrows. Could it point to sabotage? Listeners flooded comment sections with theories. A disgruntled ex-employee from a stalled Everglades project, or ties to shady offshore investors Victor had crossed during a condo deal gone south. Elena avoided it all, but Sophia monitored the feeds, her laptop screen glowing late into the night in the dim villa kitchen, the fridge humming softly. "They're turning him into a story," she'd mutter to Marco, frustration etching lines on her face. "But we need answers, not entertainment." Law enforcement shifted gears too. The Coast Guard handed the file to the FBI's Miami field office, where Agent Carla Ruiz pored over it in a windowless cubicle, the air conditioner rattling against the July heat seeping through the blinds. Stacks of reports detailed the yacht's logs, erratic drifting post 10 p.m., that faint VHF plea about the anchor, and interviews with marina staff. Raul, the dispatcher, had mentioned Victor's recent solos. He seemed off, like he was carrying the weight of the world. Ruiz drove out to Dinner Key one sweltering afternoon, the marina alive with the slap of halyards against masts and the sizzle of bait from nearby food trucks. She walked Horizon's edge, now impounded and shrink-wrapped under a blue tarp that fluttered in the breeze off the bay. The deck felt too clean, the console wiped of fingerprints, but a faint cigar ash in the tray caught her eye. Victor's brand, confirmed by Elena. No forced entry, no blood, Ruiz noted in her pad, the salt air stinging her notebook's edges. But that anchor, it's the loose end. Community whispers rippled through South Florida's tight-knit circles. At the Coral Gables Country Club, where Victor had closed deals over golf and key lime pie, members lowered their voices at the bar, the clink of ice and highballs punctuating the talk. Heard it was the mob, those Italian developers he undercut on the Brickell Tower. One silver-haired retiree confided to his bridge partner, the ceiling fans whirring overhead. Elena's bridge group rallied around her, bringing casseroles wrapped in foil that steamed with Cuban flavors, ropa vieja and plantains, but she picked at them, appetite lost to the knot in her stomach. Sophia and Marco leaned on friends too. A weekend barbecue at a friend's waterfront home in Key Biscayne turned somber when someone cracked open the cooler and pulled out Victor's favorite IPA. "To Vic," Marco toasted, the fireworks from a nearby yacht club popping like distant gunfire, but the laughter felt forced, shadowed by the dark water beyond the mangroves. As fall crept in, with cooler evenings that carried the scent of wood smoke from backyard fires, the family marked quiet milestones. Elena cleared Victor's study, boxes of blueprints and tax docs stacked in the garage, the room's leather chair now draped with a throw. She found a half-finished letter in his desk, notes on a new eco-resort idea for the Keys, scribbled in his bold script. Sustainable, like Elena always pushes. For the kids. Tears blurred the ink, but she tucked it away, a fragile thread to hold on to. Holidays loomed like storm clouds. Thanksgiving without him meant a subdued table, the turkey's aroma mingling with unsaid words. Plates passed in silence under the chandelier's warm glow. Yet, life insisted on moving. Sophia landed a partnership with a green builder, channeling Victor's vision into solar-powered homes that dotted the horizon. Marco oversaw the Fort Lauderdale project's ribbon cutting, The crowd's applause echoing off the new facades as he gripped the oversized scissors, Elena beaming from the front row despite the ache. The bay, ever indifferent, continued its dance, dolphins arcing through the waves at dawn, freighters bellowing horns at dusk. Tips still trickled into the FBI hotline, a sighting in the Bahamas, a vague match at a Nassau marina. Ruiz chased them, her sedan kicking up gravel on rural roads from Homestead to the Keys, but each led to dead ends, a sunburned tourist, a mistaken identity. By winter's edge, with northerly winds chilling the air and sending leaves skittering across the villa's lawn, the case had cooled to embers. Elena took up gardening, her hands in the soil pulling weeds from the mango tree, the earth cool and grounding. "He'd hate seeing me like this," she told Sophia one crisp morning, pruning shears, snipping rhythmically. "Idle?" Marco nodded, sipping coffee from a mug Victor had favored, chipped from a long-ago yacht party. The mystery lingered, a undercurrent pulling at them like the Gulf Stream, but routine had woven its way back in, fragile as sea glass. Little did they know. Buried secrets were stirring inland, waiting for a turn of the spade to unearth the unimaginable. It was a muggy Tuesday morning in late March, the kind where the Florida sun climbed slow and heavy, turning the air into a steam bath before noon. Inland from the coast, in the sprawling outskirts of Homestead where the Everglades pressed against cookie-cutter suburbs, a construction crew broke ground on a new housing development. The site was a former citrus grove, rows of gnarled orange trees long since bulldozed, leaving behind red clay soil that baked hard under the winter rains. Heavy machinery rumbled across the lot, backhoes growling as they clawed at the earth, dump trucks idling with diesel exhaust curling into the humid sky. Foremen shouted over the din, hard hats glinting, while laborers in sweat-soaked shirts hauled rebar and poured concrete footings for what would become middle-class ranch homes with screened porches and palm-lined driveways. Marco Langford had taken the oversight role on this project himself, a way to keep his hands dirty and his mind from wandering too far back to that empty yacht. At 28, he was broader than his father had been, shoulders built from years swinging hammers, but the lines around his eyes betrayed the weight he'd carried since Victor vanished. He arrived early that day, nursing a thermos of black coffee in his pickup, the cab still cool from the AC as he watched the crew fan out. The development, called Grove Haven, was meant to be a fresh start for Langford Developments, a nod to sustainable building with native landscaping and rain gardens to appease the eco-groups that had hounded Victor. "Let's make this one count," Marco had told Sophia over the phone the night before, his voice rough from lack of sleep, the Brickell skyline twinkling outside her window. She agreed, her tone laced with that quiet determination they'd both inherited. For Dad, the backhoe operator, a wiry guy named Javier with a faded tattoo of a marlin on his forearm, was digging the foundation trench for the first cluster of homes when the bucket hit something solid. The machine shuddered, engine whining as it strained against the resistance, and Javier killed the power, hopping down to investigate. "Hey, boss," he called to Marco, wiping grime from his face with a bandana, the scent of turned soil and machine oil thick around them. "Got resistance here. Feels like metal, not rock." Marco trudged over, boots sinking into the soft dirt, the sun already beating down on his neck. The crew gathered loosely, murmurs rippling through the group like the buzz of distant cicadas from the nearby canal. He peered into the shallow cut, about 4 feet deep, where the bucket had unearthed a tangle of rusted chain glinting dully in the light. At first it looked like junk, old farm equipment maybe, from the Grove's heyday in the 70s, when migrant workers picked oranges under the relentless sun. But as Javier used a pry bar to loosen the soil, more chain emerged, heavy links caked in clay, and what looked like dried mangrove roots. Marco's stomach tightened. Something about the weight and gauge tugged at a memory, faint but insistent. "Clear the area?" he ordered, voice steady but his pulse quickening. "Get the small excavator over here. No rushing it." The crew complied, the backhoe retreating with a low rumble, leaving a hush broken only by the flap of egrets in the marshy fringe beyond the site. Sophia was on site within the hour, driving down from the office in her hybrid SUV, radio tuned to a news station droning about spring break crowds on South Beach. She pulled up beside Marco's truck, dust clouding around her tires, and climbed out, sunglasses shielding eyes that mirrored Elena's sharp gaze. They watched as the excavator delicately peeled back layers of earth, the chain uncoiling like a serpent from the ground. It stretched 20 feet, then 30, ending in a massive fluke anchor, its points bent and scarred, embedded deep in the subsoil. Marco knelt closer, brushing dirt from the shank, his breath catching. The markings were etched faintly into the steel. Langford Developments, a custom order from a marine supplier in Fort Lauderdale, the same one Victor had used for Horizon's Edge. This is it, he whispered, the words barely audible over the idling machines. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, color draining from her face as she snapped photos with her phone, the screen blurring slightly from the tremble in her fingers. The anchor, miles from the bay. How? The crew fell silent, sensing the shift, Javier crossing himself quietly as he backed the machine away. Word spread fast. By midday, the site was a hive of activity again, but now with FBI agent Carla Ruiz directing the scene, her unmarked sedan parked crookedly at the edge of the lot. She'd aged a touch since the early days of the investigation, her dark hair streaked with more gray, but her presence was as commanding as ever, clipboard in hand as forensics techs swarmed the trench. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the dig, while a news chopper thumped overhead, its shadow racing across the clay like a predator. Elena arrived last, chauffeured by a family friend from the villa, her face pale against the black dress she wore like armor. She stepped carefully over the uneven ground, leaning on Marco's arm, the air heavy with the metallic tang of exposed earth and the faint rot from the canal. "Is it really his?" she asked Ruiz, voice cracking for the first time in months, eyes fixed on the anchor being winched onto a flatbed, chain rattling like bones. Ruiz nodded grimly, consulting a tablet with photos from the yacht impound. Serial numbers match Mrs. Langford, no doubt. Buried here, about 15 miles inland from Elliott Key as the crow flies, through swamps, highways, the works. It's impossible without intent. The implications hung unspoken, thickening the humid air. How had a 100-pound anchor ended up here? Dragged or carried from the sea, then interred like a secret? The text bagged samples of the surrounding soil, traces of salt crystals mixed with freshwater peat, suggesting it had been submerged recently before burial. No human remains nearby, but the discovery cracked open the case like a fault line, shifting everything from accident to something darker, more deliberate. Back at the Langford villa that evening, the family gathered in the kitchen, the same one where Victor had savored Elena's cafecito. Rain pattered against the windows now, a spring squall rolling in from the Gulf, thunder rumbling low over the Everglades. Sophia paced, phone buzzing with alerts from the office. Investors circling back, sensing momentum. "This changes everything," she said, stopping to grip the counter, knuckles white. Dad didn't just fall overboard. Someone took that anchor, maybe took him. Marco nodded, slumped at the island with a beer he wasn't drinking, the bottle sweating rings on the granite. "I felt it back then, with the locker empty. Sabotage. But who? Those developers he crossed? Or someone closer?" Elena sat quietly, stirring a cup of tea that had gone cold, her eyes distant as she traced the grain of the wood table. Vic always said the real estate game was cutthroat. But this, burying it like that, it's a message, or a cover-up. Ruiz joined them later, the rain easing to a drizzle that dripped from the eaves onto the pool deck outside. She spread photos across the table, close-ups of the anchor's corrosion patterns, GPS maps plotting the improbable inland route through mangroves and backroads. "We're pulling CCTV from every mile between the bay and Homestead," she explained, her voice measured but urgent. "Truck stops, marinas, even those old airboat tours in the glades. If someone hauled this, they left tracks." The family absorbed it, the room lit by the soft glow of pendant lights, shadows playing across their faces. For the first time in over a year, grief sharpened into resolve, a spark amid the ashes. Marco leaned forward, eyes fierce. Find out who did this to him. For all of us. The discovery rippled outward, reigniting the media storm. By nightfall, headlines blared across screens. Langford anchor unearthed inland. Murder plot. Reporters camped outside the villa gates again, their van's headlights cutting the dark like search beams. Sophia fielded calls from the board, assuring them the company was solid, while Marco coordinated with Ruiz's team, his construction know-how proving invaluable in mapping possible transport paths. Elena retreated to the lanai, the rain-scented air cooling her skin, and whispered a prayer to the stars peeking through the clouds. The anchor's unearthing wasn't closure, but it was a tether, a brutal buried truth pulling them toward answers long denied. As the squall passed, leaving puddles that reflected the moon, the family clung to that fragile hope. The mystery no longer adrift, but rooted deep in the heart of Florida's wild underbelly. Years have slipped by since that muddy March morning in Homestead, when the backhoe unearthed Victor Langford's anchor from the red clay soil, a rusted relic that turned the family's quiet grief into a thunderclap of renewed fury. Now, in the sweltering summer of 2024, South Florida hums with its usual rhythm, the endless crawl of traffic on the Palmetto Expressway, the salty tang of fried conch fritters wafting from food trucks along Collins Avenue, and the distant roar of jets descending into Miami International under skies streaked with contrails. But for the Langfords, time has carved deeper lines, etching the mystery into their lives like the relentless erosion of Biscayne Bay's shorelines. The FBI's investigation, led by Agent Carla Ruiz, has ballooned into a sprawling web of leads and dead ends, its nerve center a cluttered conference room in the Miami field office. The space smells of stale coffee and printer ink, walls plastered with timelines, satellite maps, and grainy CCTV stills pinned up with thumbtacks that sometimes slip and flutter to the linoleum floor. Ruiz, now in her mid-50s, with a few more worry lines framing her sharp eyes, pores over case files late into the evenings, the hum of the ancient AC unit her only company. "We've got pieces," she told Elena during a recent update meeting, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as rain lashed the windows overlooking the bay. But the puzzle's missing half the border. The anchor's recovery was the linchpin. Serial numbers confirmed. Corrosion analysis dating its submersion to within weeks of Victor's disappearance, and soil samples revealing a mix of marine salt and Everglades peat that traced its improbable journey inland. Forensic teams spent months dissecting the find. The chain showed drag marks consistent with being hauled over rough terrain, scratches from mangrove roots and gravel, no signs of marine growth beyond the initial bay exposure. Experts at the University of Miami's oceanography lab modeled the path, likely trailered by a heavy-duty truck through back roads skirting the national park, avoiding major highways with their cameras. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, Ruiz explained to the family in the villa's living room one humid afternoon. Photos spread across the coffee table amid vases of fresh orchids Elena tended in Victor's memory. The air conditioner whispered cool air, but tension hung thick as the scent of impending rain. This took planning, access to the yacht, knowledge of the area, and a vehicle to move 150 pounds of dead weight 15 miles without drawing eyes. Suspects have emerged from the shadows of Victor's empire. The FBI zeroed in on a former business partner, Roberto Bobby Valdez, a slick developer from Hialeah who'd sued Langford Developments over a botched joint venture on a polluted site near the Miami River. Valdez, with his gold chains and perpetual tan from golf outings at Doral, had motive. Victor had outmaneuvered him in court, walking away with the lion's share of a $20 million settlement. "He threatened me once after a deposition," Valdez admitted during a tense interrogation at the field office, his lawyer fidgeting beside him under the harsh lights. "Said I'd regret crossing him. But I didn't touch the guy. Swear on my kids." His alibi held. Video from a little Havana casino showed him playing blackjack the night Victor vanished. But Ruiz's team dug deeper, uncovering payments to a shady towing company in Homestead that specialized in discreet hauls through the glades. Then there's the environmental activist angle. A group called Save the Bayfront had picketed Victor's offices for years, accusing him of burying contaminants under new condos, chemical runoff from old citrus groves seeping into aquifers. Their leader, a fiery former lawyer named Tara Klein, was spotted near Dinner Key Marina days before the disappearance, handing out flyers with the yacht's photo circled in red marker. "Langford was poisoning our waters," Klein said defiantly in a follow-up interview. Her small office in Coconut Grove cluttered with protest posters and seashell artifacts, the sound of waves crashing faintly through the open window. "But sabotage? That's not us. We fight with signs, not chains." Still, a tip led to a raid on a storage unit in Perrin, where they found fertilizer bags laced with traces of the same soil from the anchor site. Klein's been cleared for now, but the whispers persist, fueling online forums where armchair detectives dissect every angle. The family has weathered it all with a resilience born of loss. Elena, at 58, has stepped into Victor's shoes at the company, her paralegal savvy now guiding board decisions from the glass tower overlooking Biscayne Bay. Mornings find her in the executive suite, cafecito in hand, the aroma mingling with the leather of Victor's old chair she's kept. "He'd be proud," she told Sophia during a lunch at a waterfront cafe in Coral Gables, the clatter of silverware and laughter from nearby tables underscoring their quiet conversation. Waves lapped at the seawall outside, a reminder of the sea that took him. Sophia, now 30 and vice president of operations, nodded, her engagement ring catching the light, a milestone Victor never saw. "We're building that eco-resort he sketched out, sustainable, like you always wanted." Marco, married with a toddler on the way, oversees projects from the field, his truck radio tuned to classic rock stations Victor loved, the lyrics a ghostly echo during long drives through construction dust. Yet, the emotional toll lingers like humidity after a storm. Family gatherings at the villa carry an undercurrent of absence. The lanai dinners with paella steaming on platters, laughter punctuated by pauses when someone mentions the water. Elena's garden thrives, mangoes ripening under the relentless sun, but she avoids the yacht club now, the sight of moored vessels twisting the knife. "I dream he's out there, calling on that radio," she confessed to Ruiz one evening over the phone, the villa's pool lights shimmering in the background as crickets chirped from the yard. The agent paused, her voice softening through the static. "We're close, Elena. That anchors our map." What they know today is a tapestry of facts laced with voids. Victor didn't abandon ship willingly. The yacht's logs show no distress signals beyond that final garbled plea about being stuck. No body, no ransom, no confession. The anchor's burial screams cover up, perhaps to stage an accident or hide evidence of a struggle. Divers revisited the inlet off Elliott Key last year, pulling up fragments of chain from the sandy bottom, but the sea guards its secrets fiercely. Public fascination wanes, but podcasts and a Netflix docuseries keep the case alive. Interviews with the family drawing tips that Ruiz chases relentlessly. A trucker recalling a late-night load near the park, a marina worker spotting a stranger with Victor's build. The Langfords hold on to fragments, his last text, the cigar ash on deck, the anchor's defiant unearthing. It's enough to fuel their fight, but the core question, where is Victor, remains a chasm, pulling at them like the Gulf Stream's unyielding current. In quiet moments, as the Florida sun sets in fiery hues over the skyline, they wonder if answers will ever surface, or if the mystery will bury itself deeper, like that chain in the earth. As the sun dipped low over Biscayne Bay, casting long shadows across the Langford Villa's lanai, Elena sat with a worn photo album open on her lap. The pages yellowed at the edges from years of humid Florida air. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of saltwater and jasmine from the garden, mingling with the distant hum of evening traffic on the overseas highway. It had been nearly a decade since Victor vanished, yet the anchor's discovery in that homestead field lingered like a half-healed scar, a reminder that some truths refuse to stay buried. Sophia and Marco joined her now and then on these quiet evenings, the three of them piecing together memories amid the rustle of palm fronds. But tonight Elena was alone, tracing her finger over a snapshot of Victor at the helm of Horizon's Edge. his smile wide against the spray-flecked horizon. The case, once a blaze of headlines and flashing cameras, had faded into the background noise of South Florida life, the relentless cycle of hurricanes, real estate booms, and spring break migrations. Agent Ruiz had retired 2 years back, passing the file to a younger team in the FBI's cold case unit, where it gathered digital dust alongside unsolved vanishings from the Keys to the Glades. The anchor itself sat in evidence storage at a federal warehouse in Doral, its rusted form catalogued with photos and reports, a silent witness to theories that multiplied like mangroves in the shallows. Was it sabotage by a rival like Valdez, whose towing company ties led to a dead-end warrant, or an inside job, perhaps a disgruntled employee with access to the marina, motivated by grudges over unpaid bonuses or cut deals? The environmentalists' soil traces pointed to eco-sabotage, a desperate bid to frame Victor for his development sins, but no smoking gun emerged, no confessions, no hidden footage from those backroad cameras that caught only deer and airboats slicing through the night. Elena's reflections often circled back to the man she knew, the fisherman's son who'd built walls of glass and steel against the tide of uncertainty. He was too stubborn to just disappear, she murmured to the empty lanai, the words dissolving into the twilight as a mockingbird trilled from the bougainvillea. Victor's last days replayed in her mind like an old VHS tape. The restlessness in his eyes during that rainy afternoon talk, the way he'd gripped the wheel of his SUV a bit too tightly when leaving for the marina. Had he suspected trouble? A threat from a boardroom foe, or something more personal, like the anonymous letters Sophia found tucked in his desk after the search began? They were vague warnings scrawled on cheap paper. The water remembers everything. The family had dismissed them as crank mail from activists, but now they haunted her, whispers of a confrontation on the yacht that ended with the anchor torn free and Victor silenced. Sophia, ever the forward thinker, had channeled the pain into legacy. Langford Developments thrived under her and Elena's guidance, pivoting to green projects that honored Victor's late scribbles, solar-powered enclaves in the Redlands, boardwalks over preserved wetlands that drew birdwatchers at dawn, their binoculars glinting in the mist. At 35, she balanced board meetings with motherhood, her daughter Isabella's laughter echoing through the villa during weekend visits, a tiny echo of the joy Victor had brought. Yet, in boardrooms overlooking the bay, where dealmakers clinked glasses of bourbon and debated interest rates, Sophia's thoughts drifted to the water. What if he's alive out there? She'd confide to Marco over late-night calls, the Brickell skyline a neon blur behind her. A new life, forced into hiding by whoever buried that anchor. The idea was a double-edged sword, hope laced with betrayal, the thought of Victor watching from afar, unable to return. Marco, now 33 with calluses from years in the field, and a young family of his own in a modest home near the construction sites, wrestled with anger more than sorrow. His days started with coffee from a thermos, the steam rising as he surveyed builds along the intracoastal, where egrets stalked the shallows and barges pushed loads of gravel under the morning sun. The anchor's unearthing had ignited a fire in him. He'd become an amateur sleuth, poring over public records in dimly lit libraries, the air conditioner rattling against the heat. Tips still came sporadically, a retired Coast Guard vet claiming to have seen a man resembling Victor on a charter in the Bahamas, or a homestead farmer recalling a suspicious truck dumping heavy junk near the old grove. None panned out, but Marco chased them, his texts to Ruiz's successor filled with coordinates and hunches. "Dad taught me to dig deep," he'd say to his wife Lila, as they rocked their son to sleep on the porch, fireflies blinking in the yard like fleeting clues. The grief had hardened him, turning loss into a quiet vigilance, but it stole sleep, leaving him staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin, replaying that garbled radio plea. Stuck. Anchor. Help. The broader world had moved on, but echoes persisted. A true crime book hit shelves last year, its cover a dramatic shot of the yacht adrift at dusk. Chapters dissecting the anchor's journey as a symbol of Florida's underbelly, corruption and development, the wild anonymity of the Everglades where secrets could be sunk or buried without a trace. Online communities buzzed with speculation. Reddit threads debating if Victor staged it all for insurance, or if human traffickers from the migrant routes through the Keys were involved. Elena avoided the noise, preferring the tangible. Victor's fishing rod mounted above the mantel, its line still coiled neatly, or the family yacht sold but remembered in stories told to Isabella about Grandpa's big boat adventures. Yet, questions gnawed. Why bury the anchor so far inland, risking detection? Was it to destroy evidence of a struggle, like blood traces on the chain now eroded by time? Or to mock the search, a deliberate taunt from someone who knew the family's pain? In the end, the Langfords found a fragile peace amid the unresolved. Elena's garden bloomed fuller each year, tomatoes ripening red under the summer blaze, a testament to growth from loss. Sophia's wedding last spring, on a beach at Key Biscayne with waves whispering against the sand, felt like a nod to Victor. The vows exchanged as gulls wheeled overhead, the reception alive with conga lines and the sizzle of fresh ceviche. Marco named his second child Victor, a small anchor of continuity. But the core mystery endures, a shadow over sunsets where the bay meets the sky in fiery golds. Where did Victor go that night? Did he fight back on the deck, the stars his only witnesses, or slip away in the dark, pulled by forces unseen? The anchor, unearthed and inert, offers no answers, only the weight of what might have been, a life reclaimed from the sea, or forever lost to its depths. As Florida's rhythms pulse on, the crack of a baseball at Marlins Park, the neon glow of Ocean Drive at midnight, the Langfords carry the questions like heirlooms, passed in hushed tones during family barbecues where the grill smokes and laughter rings tentative. They reflect not just on the man, but on the fragility of it all. Empires built on sand, loves tested by storms, truths buried deeper than any chain. And in those moments, gazing at the endless blue, they wonder if Victor watches too, waiting for the tide to turn.